Our question was, why and with what consequences did U.S. relations with the states of Central America and the Caribbean change between the 1840s and 1930s?
2020 Eyewitness News presents this evening's breaking news.
I'm Shannon Cook reporting to you live from Cuba's Havana Harbor. Just this afternoon, the ship, the USS Maine, exploded, killing 260 of the 400 American crew members on board. So far, the cause of the explosion is unknown, but the press has accused Spain. A naval blockade has been established, and Congress has voted in support of the extra money needed to fund the war.
Breaking news also from the Dominican Republic tonight as U.S. Marines surround the nation and occupy land in an effort to protect their investments in the Panama Canal, collect debts owed to them, and help restore stability in the Dominican Republic's chaotic state. This is expected to deteriorate the Dominican Republic's economy as United States Marines occupy major ports. A similar event is happening tonight in Haiti as U.S. Marines invade their nation in an effort to restore their peace as fear, political unrest, and death sweep the nation. Thousands of Haitians have died as the U.S. increases their control over the nation. Haiti will soon be a protectorate of the United States.
I'm Shannon Cook.
And I'm Emily Nelson.
Thank you for tuning into 2020 Eyewitness News.
Have a good night.
Hi, so this is going to be a really fast history lesson about Cuba after the war and Puerto Rico. So I'm going to try and fit it into 2 minutes. So time me and let's see. Ready? And go. So a little background to start on the Spanish-American War in Cuba was that the U.S. Maine had blown up in Havana, Cuba, and ultimately started the war. The Cubans fought alongside the U.S. in order to defeat the Spanish, and that was really, really important that they did that. And it was really big for the victory over the Spanish. However, the Cubans were treated as racially inferior to Americans, so it was a rocky start to their relations. But after they won, the U.S. had 3 options with Cuba, and that was leaving them alone, letting them do whatever they wanted, having them be a protectorate, or have them become a colony. Cuba couldn't be annexed because of the Teller Amendment and saying, no, you can't take that. So then the Platt Amendment was made, giving special rights to the U.S. over foreign financial, commercial affairs, as well as some naval bases in Cuba. This was because the U.S. was afraid that Cuba might not develop the way that they wanted for economic purposes. 1902, Cuba becomes a republic. That's great, yay! But it's still highly controlled by the U.S., so screw you. 1903, Cuban-American Treaty of Relations gave the U.S. more influence. The Cubans were highly pressured into it because of the U.S. Army presence in Cuba. The country had become highly economic dependent on the U.S., and they also had a new government that was imposed on them by the U.S. And their business had moved into Cuba on a large scale. American culture was imposed all throughout Cuba through the education system, and Cuba developed the way that the Americans wanted. Good for America, not so much for Cuba. After the Platt Amendment expired, Fulgencio Batista, who always cooperated with the U.S. and was the leader of Cuba, he ended up ruling Cuba with a ruthless and undemocratic government. And then Fidel Castro, a communist leader, overthrew Batista and ruled from 1958 to 59. Cubans had better conditions under the U.S. Than under Spain, but U.S. companies took up large amounts of Cuban land, broke apart Cuban village systems. Frick. Okay, I'm going to keep going anyway. But broke apart huge village systems that was based on communal ownership to increase sugar production, and it caused a whole bunch of rural depopulation, and many Cubans reduced from communal landowners to simple laborers. Cuba was a success story to the Americans. However, Puerto Rico, on the other hand, was developed much more peacefully than Cuba and had already had a large degree of independence from Spain before the war. And soon the U.S. took over with the Organic Act of 1900, setting the U.S. to administer Puerto Rico. And in 1917, they got their own legislature for local affairs, and the people of Puerto Rico were granted citizenship, but the country didn't become a state. Okay, bye. That's it.
On today's breaking news, the Spanish, the Americans, and the Cubans went to war. The Spanish-American War was a conflict between America and Spain on this year, 1898. Effectively due to the intervention of U.S. in the ongoing Cuban War of Independence. There were multiple arguments that explain why the U.S. went to war with Spain over Cuba, such as inspired by an aggressive and patriotic press campaign that inflamed public opinions, also part of American tendency to confuse selfish U.S. interest with progress and the well-being of other people. The war didn't last long. It was fought largely overseas. There was a lot of hostility between the Cuban freedom fighters and the U.S. troops. Cuban efforts were decisive in the victory over the Spanish, with their navy destroyed and the army in Cuba defeated by the Cubans and Americans. The Spanish surrendered. I will return back to you tomorrow with more breaking news. Thanks for watching.
Relationship changed with Colombia and Panama because in the 1860s, the U.S. wanted a passageway from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean that connects so they could ship goods freely and cheaply between the two areas, and the U.S. realized that the area right by Panama was perfect for a canal, but the problem was Colombia owned Panama at the time. So the U.S., with help from the Panama Canal Company, which was a French company attempting to build the Panama Canal, asked Colombia if they could build the canal in that area right there. The U.S. was willing to pay for the strip of land, but the Colombian Senate said no. So, in response, the U.S. aided a rebellion within Panama led by the Panamanian nationalists, in an attempt for Panama to become independent from Colombia. Finally, in 1903, with the help of the United States, Panama became independent from Colombia. Now, the U.S. had permanent possession of the area of land where the Panama Canal Zone would be. In exchange, the U.S. paid for the area. The U.S. made Panama its protectorate, meaning would control and protect the country. In 1914, the Panama Canal was officially finished and put into order. The canal was now an official Pacific power. In conclusion, the U.S. relations with Colombia changed negatively because the U.S. used force against Colombia and invaded their land in order to get Panama independent from Colombia. Also, the U.S. relations with Panama increased because the U.S. fought for their independence and protected them. Consequences the U.S. had to face were that they had to invade the land of Panama, but the U.S. ended up succeeding. Now, regarding Nicaragua, the United States had interest in Nicaragua because it was close to the newly built Panama Canal, but it was also in close proximity to the United States. The problem was Nicaragua was already in financial debt between problems with Honduras and El Salvador, which was hurting the U.S. business with Nicaragua. So the U.S. felt they needed to intervene to help the economy become stable. The U.S. moved into the country and stayed until the 1930s when the Somoza family, which was a pro-American authoritarian family, became the new dictators of the country. The U.S. only stayed until they felt the country could succeed without their help. Consequences the U.S. had to face were having to spend time and money to help out Nicaragua, but this bettered the relationship with the U.S. and Nicaragua because even though they invaded the country, they boosted Nicaragua's economy and left once everything was settled.
So in conclusion, U.S. relations between Central America and the Caribbean changed because the U.S. wanted to control the Caribbean and the Central American states economically while protecting their own interests.